Soviet Union, a nation that prided itself on order, power, and collective spirit. But in the shadow of this mighty system, during the 1970 and 1980, a monster was at large. His crimes were so brutal, they shook the very foundations of the state itself. This is the story of Andrei Chikatilo, one of the most terrifying serial killers in history. A teacher, a father, a communist, and the man who stole the lives of dozens of young people as the system desperately tried to hunt him down. Andrei Chikatilo was born in 1936, the Ukrainian SSR. His childhood was marked by the darkest chapters of Soviet history, the Great Famine and World War II. His mother told him a haunting story that his older brother, Stepan, was allegedly kidnapped and eaten during the famine. This trauma left a deep and permanent scar on his psyche. He grew up as a shy and awkward teenager, often bullied by his peers. He was mocked for his bedwetting. Later in life, he began to suffer from sexual dysfunction and impotence. On the surface, he lived an ordinary life. He was educated, became a teacher of Russian language and literature, joined the Communist Party, got married, and had 2 children. But beneath this facade of a model Soviet citizen, a deep darkness was festering. Neighbors and colleagues described him as a quiet, unpleasant man who smelled of sweat. At work, he had a reputation as a strict but competent teacher. However, there were warning signs. He had been fired several times for harassing female students. He wrote strange poetry filled with a disturbing romanticism. This contrast between his public life and inner world was key. He was a gray man, the perfect camouflage in Soviet society, where blending in was the norm. His violent fantasies festered for years, until they finally broke loose. His first murder occurred in 1978. The victim was a 9-year-old girl, but the true nightmare would begin several years later. His method was chillingly consistent. He would stalk bus stops, train stations, and impoverished neighborhoods, hunting for the most vulnerable. His targets were primarily young people, runaways, and sex workers, those whose disappearance would often go unnoticed by the Soviet system. He would lure them to isolated places with promises of food, alcohol, or even scarce goods that were hard to come by. And then came the unspeakable brutality. Chikatilo was not just a killer, he was a sadistic monster. Most of his victims were stabbed repeatedly, and many were mutilated. He often dismembered the bodies and engaged in acts of cannibalism. Psychologists believe his impotence and a lifetime of pent-up rage found their release in these acts of extreme violence. Over 12 years, he was officially convicted of 53 murders, though he himself confessed to more. His victims included at least 21 boys and 32 girls and young women. The geography of his crimes, concentrated in the Rostov region, earned him a grim nickname in the press, the Rostov Ripper. His method was refined to the smallest detail. He was not a spontaneous killer, but a methodical hunter. Here's how it worked. 1. Selecting the victim. He would circle train stations for hours, scanning for lone, lost individuals, often homeless, teenagers, or young men looking for work or a ride. They were the most vulnerable, the ones society wouldn't immediately miss. 2. The lure. He used his appearance of a teacher or a low-level official to appear trustworthy. His main bait was food, money, or promises of help. In the era of the Soviet deficit, these were powerful currencies. 3. The crime scene. He would lead them to deserted places, abandoned sheds, wooded belts between fields, construction sites. He always meticulously chose a location that guaranteed seclusion and time. 4. The ritual. The murder was not merely an act for him, but a ritual. It was how he unleashed all his accumulated rage, humiliation, and sexual frustration. He would often blindfold his victims to avoid their gaze, and he struck multiple times, descending into a state of uncontrollable fury. Why did it take so long to catch him? The answer lies in a perfect storm of facts. First, the Soviet system. To admit a serial killer was on the loose was an ideological failure. For years, authorities dismissed the murders as crimes of passion or the work of local repeat offenders. Second, a lagging forensic system. The USSR lacked the sophisticated profiling databases of the FBI. Their criminology was simply behind, struggling to connect the dots. Then, a tragic mistake. In 1984, another man, Alexander Kravchenko, was arrested, convicted, and executed for one of the murders. The case was considered closed. But the killings continued. This fatal error cost countless innocent lives. And finally, masterful deception. Chikatilo was the perfect citizen, a party member, a married father. He didn't fit any standard criminal profile. The investigation was led by a veteran detective, Alexander Bukanko. His team did the painstaking work, scouring forests and analyzing thousands of suspects. The breakthrough came in 1990. Chikatilo was detained for acting suspiciously near a train station. A blood sample was taken, and this is where science delivered the final blow. DNA analysis proved that Chikatilo's blood type and secretor status matched the samples found on several victims. It was the irrefutable evidence they needed. The nightmare was finally over. The trial of Andrei Chikatilo began in October 1992. The proceedings were chaotic and sensational. Chikatilo himself was unpredictable at times, calm and articulate at others, descending into hysterics, screaming and singing from inside his courtroom cage. He gave rambling, often contradictory testimony, providing gruesome details of his crimes. In the end, he was found sane and guilty of 52 proven murders. The court sentenced him to the ultimate punishment, execution by firing squad. On the 14th of February 1994, after his plea for clemency was rejected, the sentence was carried out. It is said his final words were a whisper, "Forgive me." The Chikatilo case was more than a series of murders. It was a crack in the very facade of Soviet society. It exposed a system in denial, utterly unprepared for a threat of this nature. His legacy is not just a tally of victims, but a stark lesson in how prejudice, bureaucracy, and flawed science can allow evil to thrive. This story serves as a grim reminder that the most terrifying monsters often hide in plain sight, concealed behind the most ordinary and unassuming masks. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you found this interesting. Your support helps us tell these complex stories. See you again.